Well,
Let's
hello
do it.
everybody. Welcome to tonight's episode of Ramblemancy. John wasn't ready for that, so I just pressed the button. Hi. Okay. Anyway, I don't know what that was. Um, welcome. We're here, continuing last week's conversation about villains. Although specifically tonight we're going to be talking about TTRPG villains, whether that's from
Ooh.
the GM side, the player side, etc. It'll be a good time, probably. Don't hold me to that because you might hate it. Anyway, we are going to start off with some announcements, and the first announcement is that you can catch Tomorrow is Dead season 2. I'm stuck in the AI voice now. I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened.
This was a pre-stream bit, and now Lucas is stuck here. And I am so glad that all of you are here tonight to watch our show. We are
Okay,
so
I
pleased.
can keep it together. I can keep it together.
Thank you, fellow humans.
Nope, it's gone. Um, okay.
If I could make my hands look fucked up and AI generated on command.
Um, let's see. How many fingers do I have? I know the answer because I'm a real person. Anyway, um, you can catch Tomorrow is Dead. I can't do this. I can't do this. I'm so sorry. We're just gonna.
Uh,
We're just gonna take that one again. Okay. Welcome everyone to tonight's episode of Ramblemancy, where we're continuing last week's discussion about. Stop looking at me like that, John. Um,
I'm trying to do the Amy Vorpal face so that I don't laugh.
has that ever worked for Amy? I don't
No.
think so. Anyway,
Mm.
listen, you get it. Watch our shows on YouTube live Mondays at 5 p.m. Pacific time. Okay, that's the long and the short of it. All right. The other announcement that I have is that I finally have. I mean, I've had this sweatshirt the whole time, and you can get it too. Um, at
That's
our
good.
on our merch store, as well as lots of other really cool items of merch. Um, so yeah, you can go check it out. Links in the chat and also in the comments if you're on YouTube. Um, yeah. Anyway, did I say comments? I meant description. You know what I'm talking about. Fuck.
It's all the same. It's the same.
Anyway,
All good.
I remember how to talk and be a person. John, if you would not mind so kindly stepping onto this bus instead of being rolled under it, how would you like to start us off this evening?
Oh wow, that was so.
That's the direction we took. Love that.
Damn, that bus pulled up and opened the door and said, "You get non,
There's a
kid."
there's a new there's a
Um,
new bus driver this now. The other one retired.
Oh, wow.
oh yeah, I want to say hi to everybody in chat first.
Yeah.
And then we get going. Jade Bender, hello. Jade Bender gave. I watched an absolutely the most cringy ad that I've ever seen in my life, which is saying something because I made the mistake of installing a single mobile game on my phone one time ever, and now the only thing that I get advertising for on mobile YouTube where I can't block the ads is Let's War, or the shitty like games where it's like pulling a pin out and the king drops into the lava and they're like, this game is impossible. And they just get like progressively cringier. So anyway, also Danny, hi, Matt, hello, Jade Bender, Newly Human, Silver Sugar, hello, good to see you, and Odds. Hey, hi, hello. We're just getting started because
Because
we
Lucas doesn't
haven't.
know how to talk, and
Yeah, there's an energy in the studio tonight.
Same.
I haven't been sleeping much at night. I've been sleeping during the day, and also I had coffee way later today than I normally would. That's it's a combination of all of those
Yeah.
things.
Nope, I got
I,
that.
I think the energy for me here is also just that I've had two tea on like caffeine on two separate occasions today, and I went outside a lot. So
Long
that's
coffee.
that's 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 doing me good. Anyway, what we're up to here tonight is continuing a topic that we were touching on last week, which is talking about villains and evil characters in tabletop RPGs. which I think is a pretty cool evergreen topic, especially given that one of the games that I read recently is a game in which you play as kind of objectively evil characters. Um, and I think honestly, like, I think this is I had a hot take at the end of last week's Ramblemancy that I'll repeat here, which is that evil characters themselves aren't problematic. It's playing evil characters in games that don't support being evil within the
Mm.
fiction.
Hmm.
And my hot take was that D&D doesn't really do that, which is part of why that turns out to be a problem in that game.
Yeah. I oh, man. I think that's true to an extent. I think I agree with that to an extent. Like there's certainly those caveats. Like I think you can play an evil character. I don't think it supports playing an evil campaign.
Yeah.
I think you can. I think you can get away with playing an evil character pretty readily. It like obviously like you still have to do a little bit of extra work, but I don't think that's in that case. I think that's not that's a feature, not a bug. In that case, that's
Hmm.
not really like a thing about D&D. I think that's just like the player needs to do a little extra work. But otherwise, I think you're right in that D&D doesn't support an evil campaign. But
Yeah.
yeah,
That I feel that is more true. Yeah, I feel that.
Because
yeah.
there's not like most of the monsters that you fight in games are evil alignments or things like that.
Hmm.
Like the game is kind of set up such that like most of the things that are readily available for you to
Mm-hmm.
like inject in there are evil by nature.
Right.
And while you can certainly have a reason to still fight those things as an evil character, like there's not a ton there to support that. But yeah, I don't know. It's just interesting because I read I got Luna this week from Gila RPGs, and that's a game in which you play a bunch of lunar cultists who are trying to snuff out the sun. Which is like everybody's playing bad characters, but that's like the fiction. Like the
Mm-hmm.
fiction is that you are the bad guys, which is I think like a unifying factor, right? As
Yeah.
opposed to the kind of like standard setting of D&D where everybody's like, yeah, we're playing the heroes, we do good stuff. That game approaches it from like snuff out the sun. So
Hmm. Interesting. Can I
I
say something
also
though?
yeah, go for it.
First of all, yeah, sometimes your good campaign does something that's poor flavor choice too. That was not the original thought I was going to say, but that just came up right now.
Mm-hmm.
mhm.
My original thought was I've always wanted to play a villain. The villains
Mm-hmm.
are so compelling when they're done correctly, and
Oh.
it's
So
they're
that
fun. I
that's
want to do it.
interesting because that dovetails with what I was thinking too, which was like because now that I've spent some time thinking about it, I don't know that I 100% agree with you, John, and your take. But
Mhm.
the way I'll start is by
That's what
saying,
makes it a good hot take.
yeah, exactly, exactly. And
Very true.
I I the thing that I will say to get us into my like argument there is that an interesting thought is that you don't have to play an evil character to be a villain. Um but that's sort of I actually don't have a like yeah, Matt and I are on the same yeah. We're on the same wavelength here. Um but I will also say that I don't know if there is anything inherently in the game of D&D that makes you play good characters or like I don't know that there's anything inherently in the game that does that. Like yeah, a lot of the things that you fight are like of evil alignments, but like also I mean that doesn't mean that they're automatically going to be aligned with evil characters. Um I think that there's no more there's nothing that better support there's nothing that supports a good campaign in D&D any better than like it would support an evil campaign only because and here's my thought. This is me revising my opinion from earlier, which is that I think it's the premise of the game that determines that and that is not part of the game of D&D itself. Like
Hmm. I think
yeah.
it's more of a cultural assumption about Dungeons
Yes.
and Dragons that you are playing the heroes. I think
Mhm.
because Silver's saying this perspective's interesting. I've watched a few evil campaigns and they fit into D&D well. They aren't totally my jam, but the players clearly had a blast in my grave campaigns. But I prefer good ones or evil to good. I love a good heel turn. Yeah, and I
Mhm.
think what I'm getting at personally with this take is that like Lucas said, there's frankly nothing in there that tells you which way to go or the other. Like D&D is such a big game. Um, but it retains a lot of like artifacts of its older self, right? The alignment system is more or less for determining whether or not I should smite the guy in front of me or ask him for a blessing in earlier versions of D&D.
Mhm.
If I'm a paladin, but as opposed to like smaller, more focused games that are pretty much like, here's the fiction, this is what you're operating within. So
Yeah. Well,
satanic like a word with you on the perception of players always. Oh yeah, no. Listen,
well,
I wrote a research paper about Dungeons and Dragons my senior year of undergrad. Um,
yeah. I
uh,
also just think that like yeah, I agree that it's mostly cultural assumption. I think that's mostly cultural assumptions around D&D because like one of the first things, the easiest way to get people, you know what I think is harder about evil campaigns is that it requires the players to do a lot more work. They can't just make a character and like, here I am to play D&D. They have to like actually think about what their characters want and are trying to do. It requires a lot more front work, and the reason I say that is because uh, as in like a villainous campaign, the players have to figure out why they're motivated. Whereas in a good campaign, I don't think you have to figure out why you're motivated because your motivation is stop the bad thing or
yeah,
like, and that's it. Whereas like I don't know, in an evil campaign, I think you'd have to spend some time and like actually think about what
Yeah.
you're trying to do and why. I don't know, because like in a good campaign, the DM's like, oh, this farmer needs help to stop something from preying on his sheep, and that's the quest, and it's so easy to get people involved in that, and then from there it's just like a snowball effect of like they just one good deed after another that leads them to the BBEG, you know. But
That's the
like
other reason why when yeah, go on, sorry.
no, that's it. That was where I was ending that sentence
Let
basically.
me just I was gonna say that's another reason why I so desperately want to do that because I want to I want to do the exercise as it were. I think it's an important exercise as a player to
Yeah.
like do a little bit more work with the character, and
Mm-hmm.
that is one way to do it. And I think that would be a fun way for. I would love to do that. I
Yeah.
have ideas.
I think it's also just easier as a DM when you're planning. It's so much easier to plan the good motivation, like how to motivate a good party because it's just like they're motivated by wanting to help people, you know?
mm-hmm.
Or if it's even if it's not that, then they're motivated by like trying to make money,
Yep.
you know? And that's not to
Mm.
say that's not that can't be an evil motivation. I mean, just look at capitalism. Anyway, that like I you were starting early. We're, so
Check the bingo box, everybody.
um but like at least that's like a motivation that you can be like that's neither a good nor an evil motivation, but like so it's easier I think to on the DM to be like I know what and how to motivate this group because they're trying to help people, so I just need to make somebody who needs help done, right? And like
Yeah. Yeah, all you have to do in that case is just be like, okay, well, here's a person in trouble, and everybody in the party immediately goes, great.
yeah, as opposed to like
Great, we're in. Sold.
with an evil party you have to talk first up to figure out in what ways are they evil, what are they trying to accomplish, because otherwise you don't know how to motivate them.
Yeah, which again brings me back to games like Luna,
Yeah,
right? Where again,
it's
it's
built
like
in.
you have a yeah, it's built in. You have a
Mm.
singular goal. It's like anybody who is not a moon cultist is not on your side because your goal is to make the sun bad, moon good. Um,
I feel like scientifically that doesn't hold up, but we're just gonna breeze right past that.
listen, man, the sun blew up. It's weak.
the, okay. I just
I'm just listen. I'm just
Uh-huh.
a
Yeah.
humble.
No,
I'm just a humble moon cultist.
uh-huh. Yeah,
And a
humbly trying to
humble,
destroy a celestial body, you know.
just a humble human.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, but
Well, the next thing that came into my head was, "Hello, yes, I am Chet GP."
What a bunch of fucking bullshit. I fucking hate it so much. We are in a reality.
We live in
yeah,
a society.
This
we,
is the
we
fucking.
I mean, kinda. I agree that evil in D&D requires more work, but not necessarily
Yeah.
villains. Okay, I'm not. What do you mean by this, Matt? I'm curious what distinction you're drawing here, because I think I know what you mean, but I'm curious to hear it in your words, because, yeah. But that is, you don't have to be evil to be, okay, I see. Yeah, gotcha. Um,
In D&D
yeah.
terms, you're usually evil because of how the mechanics of that game work.
Mm-hmm.
But like
Yeah.
like you can frame a chaos, you can very easily turn a chaotic neutral or a lawful neutral character into somebody who's
It's
even a lawful neutral character
it's funny
into
that
a
you
villain.
use that example, Matt, because the first person that came to mind was Jet from Avatar: The Last Airbender. So like,
Yeah, that's a
Right.
good one.
that's immediately the
Yep.
first person that came to mind. So that's funny that that's the example that you use. Let's blow up a dam. Like, yeah, that's
Yeah.
yeah. No, it's true, and I think that like, I think your typical D&D party will eventually at some point end up doing an objectively not good evil thing,
Sure.
whether they are a good campaign, a good party, or an evil party. Eventually that happens. Um,
Mhm.
I think it's largely, I mean, it's not unavoidable, but I think it does eventually happen. So, but like, it's the difference between them being the villain of the moment and the villain of the whole thing. Um,
Mhm.
but there's something really compelling too about like having villainous protagonists. Like,
Mm.
and I think it just requires a different framing, which I think then what this tells me is that it puts uh, more of this on on the DM's shoulders, which isn't the
Mhm.
worst thing in the world. It's just that like for example, I think about some of my favorite Star Wars books of all time are the Darth Bane books. Um,
Mhm.
and like those are so well, the first one more than many of the others are so compelling because it's like this guy is objectively not a good guy. He is the guy you're rooting for the whole time because the things that he's fighting against is people being extremely ignorant. And and like, what's up, Nico? Welcome. I just mentioned the Darth Bane books, which I believe is a
Mhm.
conversation you and I have had a few times. Um, but yeah, um, yeah, I think so. I think the framing is what matters in a villain protagonist sort of situation, right? Like the framing of the campaign, which is really I think what we're talking about here. Um,
Mhm.
it's not quite as simple as uh, it's not quite as simple with villainous characters, with evil characters. You can't quite motivate them in the same way. Where they're like, "Hey, this demon needs your help recovering his lost human entrails." Like, I don't like you can't quite do the same framing of quests. You
Mhm.
can't quite do the. It's not quite enough to say like, "Oh, hey, a band of paladins kicked down your door and is trying to kill you." Like you can do that, but it's not quite the same. Um,
Mhm. Yeah, but why? You need to offer the players a bunch of opportunities to do bad things so that the paladins will want to kick in their door as opposed to anyone else's doors, right?
Mm.
yeah.
You're good if you're not a coward.
Yeah. I suppose you could. Um, yeah, I don't know. I think one idea that I did once for like a one shot that works is basically like the prisoner trope, right? Where you're like I literally just lifted the whole thing from the Legend of Grimrock games where you're
Hmm.
prisoners and you are going to be executed in the morning, but you have an option. You could be pardoned of all of your crimes and lowered into this like series of caverns and ancient dungeons beneath the prison. And if you survive and make your way out, you're free. You're free to go. Um, that's like I did that for a one shot once, and that worked pretty well. I think it would be
Yeah,
better
like
as not a one shot, but yeah,
the premise carries that really well, I think.
yeah, because
Again,
now
like,
you're a
and I
group of
think
people like you have to work together if your pardon is going to mean anything,
hmm
right? Like you want to return to your villainous ways, but in order to do that, you have to survive first.
Interesting.
You know what I mean? Like and in
Mm.
order to do that, you have to work together. Like I think that's a solid premise for an evil campaign.
yeah, 100%. I think also like something that we're getting at here is when you're running a good like when you're in a good campaign, the more interesting the good characters um motivations are, the more interesting a villain you will have. Because if you have just a party full of generic do-gooders, then you're going to wind up probably with a fairly generic bad guy.
Mm-hmm.
But the more strong-willed your character is about any number of things, the more interesting the villain is about to get, because those are places that your GM can apply a little bit of pressure.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think I agree, Nico. Evil campaigns require evil GMs in the sense that you have to make room for evil as a GM, encourage the players to do evil. Yeah, I agree. Like you have to it requires a little more thought, I think. And I'm not sure if that's anything default about it or if it's just based on like our cultural assumptions about like media or whatever. But that like the protagonists, we talked about this all the time. We literally talked about it last time with like this inability that we have these days of recognizing the difference between a protagonist and a good guy. Like
media literacy, it's important. Check that box for the
and
week.
contrary to a belief that I just recently learned exists, is real. Media literacy is a real thing that exists. Yep. I'm going to take this moment to remind you that there are people out there who genuinely believe that media literacy is a made up thing. Anyway,
I
um,
swing wildly between the kids are all right and we're doomed.
yeah. Uh,
It's all over the place.
Mhm.
anyway, but yeah, I I think that's like a huge part of it. Like you have to like put things as a GM. You have to put things in front of if you're doing an evil campaign. You have to put things in front of your players that will encourage them to do the evil thing, right? Like, and I don't just mean like, hey, here's a tempting target of vulnerable villagers that have no defenses and you can kill them and take their stuff. I mean more in the sense that like, although that might be enough for some players. um Particularly if they are within the ages of 14 to 18. Anyway, not a real example based on my own actual personal experience. Anyway, but like I mean more in terms of like I think sometimes showing the like the innocent or the good guys as being like not all that good. Like the perfect example actually is any of you watch the animated Harley Quinn?
No.
So that's a great example of like you can debate whether or not those characters are truly no, they're absolutely villains. Never mind, you can't debate that. You'd be wrong. But there's but the way that they portrayed like the superheroes, like the DC superheroes in that show, all of them are so painfully fucked up in a lot of different ways. And like where it's like, oh, the heroes, but they're portraying them as like pretty not great. They're pretty terrible
Mhm.
people. Um and like
I
that
there's
yeah.
This was one that we talked about last week too, but like Arcane is a pretty good example of that. And then I think another really good one is Nimona. Um, Nimona is really, really good. Both the comic and I think it's a movie. Is it a movie or is it an animated
I think it's a
series?
movie. It's a movie.
Yeah, it's a movie. Both the movie and the comic are really, really play with themes of villainy, right? The guy who is to everyone else in the story the villain is in fact like a pretty objectively good dude, and the guy that everybody else thinks of as the hero, and like the people that everybody thinks of as heroes are actually like doing some pretty shitty stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
it is indeed a movie.
Yeah. But like I think so when I say like when I in my version of what Nico is talking about, which is like encouraging your party to like do evil things, I think sometimes it's also portraying the like typically the heroic characters for your villain protagonist, portraying them as pretty not good, as like kind of
Mm-hmm.
shitty, right? Like in the Harley Quinn animated show, like Batman sucks. That dude straight up sucks. Like just and like Superman also not great. Like they're all pretty terrible. But but and so and it works because then you're seeing like with villainous characters try like Harley Quinn's whole thing for the first like couple seasons is trying to become her own supervillain outside of the Joker. Um
Mm-hmm.
and then eventually that sort of shifts a little bit. But like in a story where it's about a villain trying to be a villain, having the heroes be kind of shitty people, I don't know, man. Like I think that's part of the encouragement of the characters to do evil things. Um Welcome, welcome. I don't care. Thanks for the first time chat. Congrats. Welcome, welcome on in. In
Yeah,
Nimona, the movie villain is not just the villain. I love them. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I love when any kind of media will sort of play with those like good and evil and villain and hero. That's one of the reasons why Megamind was such a great movie, in my opinion.
oh god, yeah.
Megamind was so good.
Um, Also being taken back to Dr. Horrible's sing along blog.
Mm-hmm.
That was another one that played with that kind of stuff. So
Yeah, yeah.
there's just lots of good examples.
Yeah. So, okay, I want to sort of shift us a little bit because we're talking about TTRPG villains, whether that's like the villains that the GM makes or PCs playing evil or villainous characters. I want to talk about because we've mentioned before that like earlier in this conversation that requires a little bit of work
Mhm.
to do like the evil characters or the like um yeah the villainous campaign. I'm curious what kind of work do you guys think needs to happen in order to make those things viable in a campaign?
I think because we talked about this a little bit, like but good characters are very easy to motivate. Altruism is an incredibly
Mm-hmm.
simple kind of motivation. Someone is in trouble, it's pretty normal for you, a person, to go, that person needs help, I should help them.
Mm-hmm.
But like Nico said earlier, you do have to provide reasons for a character to be evil, and I think that's like really the root of it is when you make your character. If you're playing an evil character, evil game of Dungeons and Dragons or whatever game you happen to be playing, your character has to have an extremely powerful motivator, right? Whatever it is that your character wants, they need to want they have to want something, and they have to have a reason to want it so bad that they will do just about anything for it. Um, and like what that can look like, it can be very different. Your character can be like can have like a different like personal or moral like code, but like they have to have a reason to want a thing, um, badly enough that they don't they don't act like a hero does.
Yeah. I think also on the part of like the 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 player, there's a certain amount of work that the player needs to do as well to like in that sense, right? To like just determine like whenever I'm in a video game, if I'm doing like an evil playthrough of a video game, I always make it a point to like determine, okay, as a villain, why like what am I trying to get? And what lines will I not cross, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it's I feel like so often, especially in TTRPGs, people use the like evil character, the villainous character as an excuse to cross every line. But I actually think it's a lot more interesting if if, as a villain, as an evil character, you have lines that you don't cross. As my like when I'm making NPCs like evil NPCs for like my the games that I run, I always define where their lines are. Like, what line does this character not cross? Where are they going to, like, is there anything that they will absolutely not do in the pursuit of their goals? Um, and so, like, that I think is part of the work that a player needs to do, is to figure out, like, what things will my character do? Yes, that's the obvious question. What things will they not do, though? And that is, I think, an even more important question in an evil character, an evil villainous campaign. Um, yeah, even evil has standards is a great trip. I agree. I agree.
Yes, because I too love the rogues.
Wait, what are we talking? The rogues?
The Nico just I don't know. Runa Relic, yeah, nuance is fascinating. Any character than grand scope of it tends to make them more memorable. Yeah, yeah, I do like that. I think that can be very helpful in defining like
Oh, gotcha. Yes,
yeah
yes.
in defining your in defining your character though, right, is going like, yes, my character is like wants this thing, but what things won't they do also, I think then makes them interesting,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to just like, yes, I'm super evil and I take candy from babies and run my rocket car over little old ladies crossing the street, right?
Yeah. 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 No, that's. I also think it's important. Like, I think I am. I'm going to cautiously say that if you're playing an evil character, sorry, I'm sort of thinking through my thought before I actually say it. I think I will cautiously say that if you're playing an evil character, then it's more important to define your goals, because the thing about being an evil character is, in order to be evil, you have to do, in order to be an evil, you have to do evil things, right? Like, you could just say I'm passively like I am evil, and then do nothing evil, and that won't make you an evil character. Like, you have to do evil things. But I think in order to do that, you have to be like, for example, I think people define chaotic evil as the, like, doing evil things without reason, just like capriciously evil, just doing it just to fuck people over just for the sake of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that I find that particularly interesting. You know how I would make an interesting chaotic evil character is defining chaos as freedom.
Yeah, I think that is a lot of times an issue that people run into, again, particularly in people who play like exclusively D&D, is that they see chaotic and go, "Oh, I have no reason to do anything. I just
Mm-hmm.
do whatever is most evil in any given situation." Like, no, no, no. Like, I'm pretty sure that when you look at the descriptions of each of the alignment tags, like what chaotic is oppositional to rules.
Yeah,
Not necessarily like this person's just a wild card.
yeah, yeah,
Like someone who defies structure,
yeah.
which is again, it's meaningfully different, I think.
Yeah, and Care, I think this is a good point. I feel like in many games they're not evil in that sense. Maybe desperate, maybe greedy, maybe in need. There are so many possibilities to be against the. Yeah, yeah, totally.
And this gets kind of at what I was saying earlier, is that like there, when you make an evil character or when you're playing an evil game, you have to have a compelling reason for your character not to make the right choice in a situation, right? Is that desperation? Is that greed? Is that something that they need? Like, what pressures what pressures create the environment in which the evil choice is the one that they feel is the correct one to make?
Yeah, yeah. And like,
What
one of an important thing that I do in my games, and it's to a point where, like, I don't even talk about it anymore with my group, because I think we've played with this assumption for so long that uh, it's just sort of ingrained in, like, my usual group. Um, that, like, when it comes to the alignment chart, right? The only actual, like, cosmic forces that exist in the world are, like, law and chaos, right? Good and evil exist in more relative ways, but good and evil exist as cosmic forces only in cosmic beings. So, like, demons, devils, angels, all that sort of stuff. Those things can be like the good and evil, like, capital G and E, right? Where people can't be. People like have their own complex motivations, and they are not controlled by the forces of good and evil or whatever. They're not like, you know, avatars of evil. They're just people. But like law and chaos, on the other hand, those are cosmic forces that exist and impact the world. And so like I think of it that way. Whereas good and evil are defined by choices, and no mortal can be good or evil. They simply do good and evil.
Yeah, like it's one of those deals, right, where like a Solar will smite in equal measure a person who stole some stuff because their family was hungry and a guy who murdered somebody.
Yeah.
Right? A divine being sees right and wrong in black and white.
Mm-hmm.
People are different. And Rinnerlex says, I really think of alignment as a very, very loose direction locked into alignment is honest and same. Yeah, like Lucas has been saying, it doesn't make sense for player characters to operate on extremes of the good and evil spectrum in D&D. It was, if anyone who was watching me go, oh, in the middle of Lucas talking, I was like, oh, this. I guess this is why I've always written neutral in a bunch in a bunch of my alignments when I'm playing pretty objectively what a lot of people would consider to be a good character. I'm like, I don't think that I should do the lawful good thing in every single situation. I'll do a bad thing sometimes, but mostly I'm doing the bad thing because it feels like what my character or needs to do in that moment.
I think Nico, I think that's fair. I'm not sure if I do or not. I mean, I mostly just don't pay that much attention to it. And if I do, it's mostly as a means of, like, I don't take it as like as law. I don't take it like I don't take it as like objective. This is the way things are. I think of it as like each of those things have a particular interpretation to me. Each of the alignments have a particular interpretation to me personally that, like, not a particular interpretation, but have like sort of a spectrum attached to them of like different archetypes that I then build on when I'm, but only I don't use it at all when it comes to like PCs. Like I don't care what your alignment is as a PC. I truly don't care. It's more interesting to me what choices you make. But yeah, I use it when I'm designing NPCs and things like that. A lot of people refer to this as like using it as a starting point, I guess, but I think there's still some use for it, just not as an objective system of determining what your character's morality or like what choices they're going to make are, if that makes sense. Like it's a useful thing to sort of inform the character creation process, just not as like this is my guiding star for who this character is.
Honestly, I think lawful to chaotic is the more like useful thing on that scale from left to right, and
I
really
agree.
Truly what good and evil are asking you in terms of being a player in Dungeons and Dragons. Is your character essentially altruistic or not?
Yeah.
Like is your character essentially altruistic or essentially selfish? And most people, again, most times that people are seen to play a game of Dungeons and Dragons, like it's your classic swords and sorcery. You know, you're a bunch of adventurers who, whether it's coin, like your job is helping people. At a certain point, you chose to do this over anything else because you get something out of helping people.
I also, like Matt said, evil doesn't always equal villains, and I 100% agree. One of my favorite things to do as a GM is have an all-good party, or like a more or less altruistic party, and then put them in a situation where they have to work with an objectively terrible person, who are like they're all working towards the same goal, and then they become tenuous allies, and that's one of my favorite things to do. Like this is objectively not a good person, but they are trying to do the same thing you're doing.
Things aren't always in black and white.
Yeah.
I don't know why I did the pirate voice.
Yeah.
This has been a public announcement from Captain Barbosa.
300 souls. Sorry.
Sorry,
300
the shadow
human.
vowel.
Sorry. I need to leave.
Yeah. Yeah. Bill Nighy's Davy Jones is maybe my favorite thing ever. I love Bill Nighy. Like this, he's one of my favorite actors.
Oh yeah.
Oh God, yeah, you're right. That's a Warframe reference, and yes, that is a good example of a tenuous alliance trip. You are most definitely not. Sorry, no, we are not. Listen, I used to be involved in choir. I love a good shadow vowel, and there are so many of them every single time you saw on screen.
That's what got clipped.
300
That's the moment that got
souls.
clipped.
Oh God, I'm so bad. I'm so bad.
Yeah.
We've had a lot of good stuff this stream between the Davy Jones and also like a good thwarp at the beginning. It's been a minute since we had a good thwarp.
Thwarp? Oh, did we have a thwarp?
Yeah, we did.
I don't remember it.
I gave us a good one of those.
Oh.
I think the reason that I don't remember the thwarp is because I was too busy trying to remember how to be a person for a few minutes at the beginning of the stream.
I'm sorry, but that sounded more like a thwap, not a.
Oh, that's true.
thwap.
You know, he's got a point, John. He's got a point. That was more of
See if
a.
I can get it good.
I feel like there's a.
It didn't. Your Discord didn't. Your mic didn't catch that one.
Nah, my mic definitely peaked for that.
Yeah.
It was like, no, you're not allowed to do that.
Yeah. Well, you know, a good thwarp is rare as a. Never mind. I don't know where I was going with.
Hard to come by these days.
It's hard to come by these days. The economy, am I right? Anyway, so.
No, I'm just nodding because
I'm sorry.
the thing to do. It's in these days. It's in.
Don't entertain this, Freeman. Don't entertain this stupid shit.
See this? It's in the nod.
Don't encourage this.
How should I know? I am just a human. What do I?
That's a nice emote that you got there. It's a nice emote you got there. Odds.
Hey,
I've got a sticker about emote.
Okay, all right. Nico says, we talked a lot about playing evil characters. I really want to hear especially Lucas's take on what it takes to run a good villain as a GM, as in a BBEG villain. Yes, good, thank you. I was hoping that we would come to this at some point during this. Okay.
Thanks for bringing this back in, Nico. Goodness.
Nico, the herder of cats on this channel. Sometimes you need mods to corral, like, unruly chats. Sometimes you need mods to corral unruly streamers.
Yeah.
So, okay. BBEGs. I think. So, I actually, interestingly, and Freeman may disagree with this, I don't know that I'm the right person to ask about this because I've written some good villains, but I think my problem, as I've brought up before on streams, my problem is that I think I empathize with my villains way too much, and often turn them into, like, I go too far in the direction of making them, their positions understandable, to the point where often they end up becoming redeemable villains. Or they are on the other end of the spectrum, they're just kind of cartoonishly evil for no discernible reason, because the script that I wrote says they have to be evil.
I genuinely think that I did a pretty good job making villainous characters in the home game that I ran a few years ago for our college friend group, and I think I did a pretty good job of making a character that was not really that I did not intend to be redeemed, even though he wound up being, through a series of insane dice rolls. And a character that I did kind of intend to that could flip either way, right? It truly depended on how the characters received her. And I think it really does come back to the same way that you as a player make an evil character that needs to have a very powerful motivating factor, I think the key to a good villain that you're running as the GM is they need a reason to be opposed, like that there needs to be a reason for them to have some level of friction with the party, right? And in the instance that I used, it was that a character and her brother were both vampires and were essentially losing their grips on their own sanity after several centuries. And one of them sort of knew but was trying not to see it, that their brother had already like really lost themselves, and the other was trying to find a way to reverse the curse of vampirism on them, but out of, as we talked about earlier, desperation, had begun to resort to less and less traditionally good methods of doing that, and was resulting in like people were being hurt because of it, but they were powerful, desperate, and a little bit selfish. And so that those things together, like the effects of their behavior, then kind of dispersed down to the characters, where like there's undead wandering around because of what they're doing. People are like going missing because one of the other vampire who's kind of like lost himself to the grips of the hunt is like him and his thralls are now running around town killing people, because that's like what vampires do, like slaves to the sanguine hunger, I believe is the term they use to describe Astarion when you meet him in Baldur's Gate 3. And so like your villains should have a reason, like a reason to be doing whatever it is that they're doing, and then those like move down from there. Like start with who is my villain and what do they want, and then kind of move down to what does that look like? Like how are they doing that, and then what does that look like?
Yeah.
And that kind of gives you those things kind of feed into each other to give you a good villain.
Yeah. And I agree with all of that. And I think I also want to clarify something I said earlier, which is like I'm not against redeemable villains. Love some redeemable villains. It's one of my favorite tropes. However, not every villain needs to be redeemed or a redeemable villain. Although I think there's something to be said about a campaign where that's set up where that's the point. That's how you defeat your villains, right? That could be really interesting. Now I have a different idea. This is the curse of being a GM. Anyway, but I do like every now and then, like sometimes there just needs to be the uncompromising villain who will not be talked down under any circumstances. And I think to that end, to make that villain, you need what John is essentially talking about, which is basically the one who like has selfish goals. Actually, having somebody that the villain cares about is one of the best ways of doing that. Like a family member, a spouse, a child, whatever. Those are perfect because like
Dracula from like
that's
Dracula
exactly what I was
from
thinking.
Castlevania is a fantastic example.
Yes.
Dracula at any moment could choose not to do terrible things because humans killed his wife, and instead chooses to do really bad things because he is absolutely grief-stricken.
Yeah, absolutely. Or even in like protecting, right? To protect, not necessarily avenging, but also protecting is kind of
Anakin
a great
Skywalker.
God,
Sure.
yes. That could have been written so much better, but the premise was good. The premise was solid. Like that's I think a good way of doing this. Like at this point, I'm sort of giving advice that I don't think I have followed particularly well myself. But like, yeah, I think one of the things it takes to run a good villain is that yeah, they have to have a powerful motivation that if you don't intend for them to be redeemed, or maybe even if you do, they have to have something that will render them uncompromising, right? Where like they're not like alien, they're not so cartoonishly evil as to be completely alien, right? Sort of one of my problems with Orin the Red in Baldur's Gate 3 is this like she has one personality trait, it's murder. That's her entire personality. And that's fine. I mean, you need one of those in there, and at the very least, they balanced it out with the other two. With the other two of the chosen three, they balanced it out with them. But you also, it's just not something I find terribly compelling, right? So you need to find a balance between that. Like you have to have them do evil things, but you have to also make them, I think, make their motivations something that can be understood, because and this is the important thing about why you do that, because that gives you so much to draw on when trying to write and plan for your campaign. Because if you know why they're doing what they're doing, you have a well to draw on for what they will do.
Yeah, I think, and this is a pop culture reference that I think a lot of people will have some context for. But the Briarwoods from
Mm-hmm.
Critical Role in
Cool.
particular, Critical Role Campaign One, are a great example, I think, of this. In that, like, Silas and Delilah Briarwood really truly care only about each other,
Mm-hmm.
and ensuring that, like, they continue to exist together forever. And to that end, they will do
Yeah.
anything.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
These are two
correct.
people who will not accept a version of reality in which they are not both together.
Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the story was that Silas had died and Delilah pledged herself to Vecna for to bring
Yes.
him back, and now serves him. Basically, it's the Ketherick Thorm, right?
Like,
Serves him loyally because she brought him back, or because he
yeah,
brought him back.
he was dying, and instead of letting him die, she pledged
Right.
herself. Like, Vecna basically was like, I can save him if you serve me. And she said, sure.
Mm-hmm.
And he became a vampire, and she became an immortal necromancer in service to
Mm.
Vecna. And that was
Yeah.
that was that was the origin story for the
Yeah.
Briarwoods
I'd forgotten.
at
God.
a very high level. But
Right. 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 Um.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow.
she
That'd be a
broke
really
the
cool
world for him.
story. That'd be really cool to be able to happen upon that organically, playing that that development with a player. That would
Yeah.
be interesting.
Yeah. I
Wow.
I am currently playing with Freeman. If you hear this, no, you didn't. Um, I'm currently playing with the idea of like in the campaign that I'm running right now, of having of doing. I don't. And I'm gonna cover my own ass here because one of my players is literally right here.
Just give me a
It
thumbs up when you're ready.
Oh, okay, cool. He's muting himself. Cool. So I'm playing with the idea of doing a villain eventually that is a friend of the parties. That they are like they get along very well. They get along, but at some point their beliefs they don't have antithesis or antipathy for each other. But at some point their beliefs might tear them apart and force them to opposite sides. And so that's something I'm playing with right now, is going I've done the like villain to friend route. Now I'm doing the other way. Maybe it might not go that way. It's possible it doesn't go that way, but yeah, anyway.
Mhm.
Lovely thing about these headphones is I can just turn the dial down and I can't hear a single thing.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah,
was
you just
staring at
go.
your lips the whole time, trying to get something just for fun.
Joke's on
Cool.
you. I don't know how to enunciate or speak in general.
Also, hi
Hmm.
Cam.
Hi Cam. Yeah. Joe said something really interesting in chat here, which was, I found the quote that definitely helps me running a BBEG. A protagonist and their story can only be as intellectually fascinating and emotionally compelling as the forces of antagonism make them, which kind of fits with. That's really cool. I like that quote. That's really really cool, and I think that's fair, because like to me, I think that some of the most compelling villains that I've seen are the ones whose stories, like, they're so painful. Like, they hurt, and you feel so much, like, sadness and empathy for them. And the villains that make you think, God, if you'd only had other choices available to you, you would have been such a great, like, man, you could have been so good and so heroic and so awesome, but you've chosen this other thing, or circumstances didn't allow you to choose any differently, or something like that, right? Where it's just like, oh
Mhm.
God, what was I watching recently that was this exact thing? Oh God, I can't remember, but
I knew there's a line to that effect in Ahsoka that's about Sabine, basically, where, like, Ahsoka's like, she says something like, she was fated to, like, um not destroy the map and let everybody jaunt off to the next galaxy over to bring Thrawn back. And I think the droid system, well, that maybe that's the only choice that she could have made.
Mhm.
And it's kind of the same idea. It's like,
Yeah.
well, it's the only choice that this character can make.
Yeah.
A couple characters in Ruby whom that fits. Yeah.
Man, this is gonna really bother me because I was watching something recently where it was like it was tragic that they were making these choices, and the whole time you're like, God, I get it, but like, huh, if you had only been able to like had another choice available to you, or like if you had only I don't God, and I cannot remember what it was. That's gonna really bug me because it's a perfect example of like exactly what we're talking about, but I cannot for the life of me remember what it was. Um, yeah, but the point being that if your villains, if the forces of Jinx from Arcane is a good example, but that's not the one I was thinking of, but that is a good example, Nico.
That's true.
That's actually a great example because yeah, like that's perfect, exactly, because that one right there is like that's someone who's like whole everything that led her that way is a series of tragic misunderstandings and then lack of choice or the illusion of lack of choice and the just circumstances being against her. And yeah, that one's one that hurts. That's one that hurts because you're like it's more sad than anything. I think some of the best villains are the ones who like make you sad. Like they
Yeah.
don't make you hate them, they make you sad.
Yeah, yeah. No, there was a moment in
Yeah.
Arcane, the moment in which Jinx tries to intervene, and that's kind of the big turning point for her character
Sure.
because it results in the death of a paternal figure.
Yeah.
Um, but like I saw it coming a fucking mile off, like 2 or 3 minutes in advance, and I was like, "Fuck you." Oh,
Yeah.
I know that this character has to wind up villainous, but fuck you. That's
Yeah.
so sad.
Which is why I'm so
Mhm.
excited for season 2.
Yeah. Absolutely. I only wanted to help. Pain. Um,
The
Uh,
pain. The pain is real.
Okay,
Ugh.
even if you look at the real world, like bad people always have something going on. I'm studying social sciences and yeah, masters in social science. People who are weird but kind of reasonable. Yeah, like there's never whether or not those people are still reachable. You can always there's always a path, right? Humans are more or less predictable creatures, but yeah, 6 months to hold on. What now?
Arcane?
Arcane.
I mean, that's in
Arcane
November, but
2, Arcane 2 Electric Blue. Oh shit, it is already it is already May, I suppose.
I'm still
it's
living in
April
February.
showers, May flowers.
Freeman, there's flowers outside my door. I think it's
It is,
happened.
but it's raining tonight, and I don't want rain. I want flowers. Sorry, did I spike the microphone? We'll edit and
No, you're
post.
good.
I'm sorry.
You're good. We're edited in post. Please, what fucking studio do you think this is?
I'm
The
sorry,
one where
that does feel like an improv bit. Um
what studio do you think this?
fucking studio do you think this is? Where the hell have you been, Freeman? um,
Well,
I don't
so
want
much
rain,
fun
I
to
want
say.
flowers.
It's so fun to say.
oh, God, what was I gonna say?
Yeah, sorry. There was some.
We'll
There's
edit
some.
it out and post the editor in chat.
Yeah.
um, yeah, okay. I lost what I was thinking, but yeah, still living in 2022. Yeah, I agree, Nico. Um,
But too many of my favorites are just so unapologetic, but they do it with style. Killer number 2 from Benraku and Ursula at the end. Yeah, I feel like anime does honestly, like good anime does a really good job of making characters that you just love to hate. Like you're like, if it weren't for the fact that you're super fucking evil, I would adore you, and I still kind of do anyway because of the sheer amount of panache. I think we do love the tragic villain in media these days, but every so often you gotta respect the dude who's unapologetically evil but real cool about it.
Okay, I've got a question for the GMs out there, which is that you ever look back on something that you did long before you knew as much as you do about DMing and go, how did I get worse? Like, because I'm now
Maybe.
thinking we're thinking about villain. We're talking about villains, right? And I'm thinking about Cordelia from like our campaign, right? And you know where that
Ooh.
came from? It came from such a ridiculously high concept of like for like it came from like a thought where because so I'll summarize this for for context, but basically Cordelia was a vampire and she was an emancipated vampire, so one whose master had been killed. So she was no longer under his yoke, but he'd been killed before she was never under his yoke because he died before she like came back. Um, and her mentor was like a slayer, and she was his apprentice and got turned on a job, um, where sort of mistakes were made and whatever. Um, and the when the party encountered him, he was like drinking in a tavern and whatever, and like they compared themselves to him. They're like, "Oh yeah, we're just like you. We're adventurers, just like you." Um, oh, good night, Care. Thanks for coming in. Good to see you. Uh, he's like, "We're adventurers, just like you." He's like, "Oh, you think you're just like me? Okay, well, let me challenge you." And basically, the challenge that he gave them was like, I'm tracking down a nest of vampires that are like just outside the city. You think you're as good as me? Go for it. Uh, and did this kind of wager thing. And in the reality, it was him tracking down his ex protege who had become a vampire who he couldn't when she first came back, he couldn't bring himself to kill her, and so she escaped. And then he spent the rest of his life like tracking her down and chasing her down, and so he forced he basically made trick the party into going after her because once he'd caught up with her finally, he still couldn't do it. So he kind of got the party into it, right? And there was a whole thing where they ended up like staking and killing all of them while they were in their coffins, and then she was the last one and stopped them. Basically, they had killed her entire family that she had like been gathering, like a whole coven of like emancipated vampires who were seeking a way of curing themselves because none of them had asked for this. None of them asked to be what they are, and of course the party got involved and all this sort of stuff. Anyway, in it he the in this one of these sessions when they went back to talk to the guy, he had a line about how like in the end we are only as good as the world allows us to be, and the world makes us into monsters. And it was a line that was intended to talk about him, that he had is like in eventually you become the monster that you're in order to fight monsters you have to become the monster, right?
Mm-hmm.
Eventually it turns you into that. But it's also a commentary on her that she never wanted to be the monster, but the world decided she was one, and so she became
Right.
one. Um, and
Very Nimona.
right, it's like
Um,
one of those things, and like I've never done anything remotely close to that. Like that's so like high concept, and I'm like every time I think about it, I'm like, how did I get worse at this? Like, how did I like? It's been like what about 6 years since then, 6 or 7 years since then. And I'm like, how did I get worse somehow? Like,
I think genuinely this is like one of the natural progressions as you get better and better at running games, I think, is that like your prepping and your planning process becomes more and more streamlined because you have more and more things to draw on. The more you do it, the better you get, the more stuff you have to more experiences you have to rely on and call back on. And so like your prep changes. And this is one of those things that like I think genuinely does benefit from the kind of like sit down, think about it, write it out kind of prep as opposed to like the really kind of seat of your pants go by a list of bullet points and vibes. Like that's you can get really cool stuff still that way and you get really fun stuff, but I think that might I don't know, that's my
yeah,
that's my my theory off the cuff is just that like the reason is that like it's the thing that naturally happens when that we naturally do. We kind of as people just seek the path of least resistance.
Yeah.
And the more comfortable you get, like when something becomes routine, that can be the death of it
Mm.
being fundamentally like the most creative it can be, which is why
Sure.
like it's this weird thing of like, yes, like prep in the way that's the most conducive to you running the game, but also like breaking yourself out of a rut or whatever.
Yeah.
So,
It's just like I think that's got to be it, because there's also definitely like there's definitely an element to it where like I feel like I don't spend as much time anymore. Like, and I'm not talking like dedicated sit down write notes kind of time. I mean more in terms of like just like mental space, right? Thinking about
mhm.
like that aspect of the game anymore. Like I used to like in any moment where I wasn't actively doing something else, I would just find my mind drifting to like D&D and being like, "Oh man, this is so compelling. Oh, this would be so cool. This would be such a good idea." And I find that that's an energy that is often the energy of like newer DMs. You know what I mean? Where they often have, I think,
Mm.
more creative and like grandiose ideas because they've entered a new world and now their minds are exploding with possibilities.
Mhm.
And I feel like when you've been doing it for a while, maybe it's not always the case, but I think at a certain point that starts to kind of like I don't think it goes away, but it just sort of like mellows out a little bit.
I think too, like I think it's like a D&D specific tendency too, because I think that part of that reason is also that like D&D relies a lot on the ingenuity of the game master
Mm-hmm.
to generate adventures. And so if it's always reliant on you, you're not going to crank out like banger after banger after
Yeah.
banger after banger, right? It's just not possible. It's not how people work. Um, but games that are like slightly more focused than D&D or much more focused than D&D, I think offer more prompting for villains or with greater dimension, right? Or even just for stories that like Belonging Outside Belonging, I think does a fantastic job of this. It's a system, it's a GMless. I don't know that's always GMless. I don't think Belonging Outside Belonging has to be. I know No Dice No Masters is, but basically, like the way that it works is there are playbooks for the setting, and then everybody has a character that they're playing. And at any time, I think in No Dice No Masters, you can pick up a setting playbook and then use the setting moves. And the reason that the system is called Belonging Outside Belonging is it's almost always dealing with some system of oppression. So like you'll pick up a playbook and use moves that affect the characters at like a high level, or like the way that the place or like a villainous force will affect the characters. And then the rest of the characters playing their playbooks now have to respond to those things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think stuff like that that more actively like prompts you to make villains with a certain like end or along a certain theme can be more helpful
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. Um. Yeah. Lynn says that line also reminds me of the character arc of Elphaba the Wicked. She was never allowed to be good because of how everyone else saw her. Yeah, so that's the whole reason that I designed. That's the whole reason that the character's name was Cordelia to begin with, because it was intentionally a Shakespeare reference to King Lear, which is the exiled daughter, the one who was like sent packing because she did not fit the mold of the ideal
Mm.
daughter.
Yep.
That was the whole reason that character was named that. It's a Shakespeare reference, and I'm an English nerd. Anyway, what more do you want from me? Yeah. Nico says in my second ever 5e session as a GM, created, introduced, and by chance of dice, killed off an NPC, and it made the entire table weep. I've been chasing that high ever since. Yo, I feel that. Um, yeah,
Listen, like you just gotta make step one: create Snorgle the Kobold. Step two: kill off Snorgle the Kobold. You've done it.
yeah. I mean, there is a certain like there is a certain formula, a little bit like element of formula to like make make a sort of a silly, jokey NPC just as like a bit, and then of course everybody at the table falls in love with them and cares about them, and then
Immediately attached.
immediately something bad also happens to them, and now everybody is like, we're going on a revenge quest now for Snorgle the Kobold.
Well, like
like
this reminds me unironically
It
of
was good.
Lucas came to visit here, and I ran a D&D one shot for Lucas and some local friends.
the
And
laundry kobold.
while
Poor laundry kobold.
yeah, while this was happening, I'm gonna go to Boo's Twitter right now while I tell the story and get the picture. While I was running a D&D one shot, and I was testing out a game system that I had been developing, and the system in question was like this, kind of like high powered like staple Destiny 2 to Dungeons and Dragons and see what happens. And my roommate was doing laundry, and unfortunately at the time our dryer was not completely broken, but was
Screaming?
in bad shape, and so every time the drum turned, like it was bad, and it had really gotten to the point where it was just constantly screeching in that kind of like warbling tone as the drum rotated. And it was a couple hours of laundry drying, and so over the course of this game, we invented, oh yes, that's just laundry kobold, a kobold standing in the corner doing laundry, and like the
Because
longer the game went on,
He's cursed.
yeah,
His
the longer the
laundry
game
is
went
never
on,
clean, so he's always got to be doing it.
yeah, the longer the game went on, the more we went from haha, it's a kobold screaming and doing laundry in the corner to, oh no, the kobold's cursed, to we have lore for this, to I guess we need to save this kobold now. By the end of that game, like I should have thrown out the boss fight and be like, no, fuck it, we're saving the kobold.
Yeah, and timed it perfectly so that we finished the final moment, let's saving the kobold at the moment that laundry is done. And yeah,
Really should have gone and checked the timer on the dryer.
exactly. Yeah. But yeah,
Jim's
Nice.
gotta do so much. Also, I have to check the laundry timer too. God.
yeah.
Yeah.
When
Anyway,
will
free laundry kobold.
laundry kobold?
Cursed by a
Hashtag
hag
laundry
to
kobold.
forever have dirty laundry that he must always be cleaning.
Mm-hmm. Yep. No matter how much he scrubs, there's always more.
Mm-hmm. And if
There's
there's one,
always
like, it's
laundry.
not that he has to, like, his laundry is just always dirty, but if there's one thing that we know about kobolds, it's that they're neurotic. So, like, that man can't stop. The laundry is dirty. It's gotta be clean.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Holy shit, y'all! I'm so lost. Okay.
Got
Yeah, I was
got
playing along, but like, what?
lost in the ramble.
It's so good though.
Where
I was telling a story about a very charming character that we invented on the spot. Sisyphus really should have taken a picture or a page out of Chris Redfield's book and just punched the boulder.
Mm-hmm. It's true. Oh my
But why
God.
would you do that to Boldy? That's a Hades reference for everybody in chat.
Oh man.
Yeah.
I'm
feeling conflicted.
I'm trying to think now of like other villain things for like running the villains in TTRPGs, because I know there's more than that. Like I feel like we've gone very like motivation and backstory and that kind of stuff, but like in terms of like the practicality of running them, I know a lot of the time the common wisdom is like plan what the villain would do if the heroes didn't interfere, and I that's decent advice, but like I also don't like a lot of advice that I feel like gets shared around. Things get taken as law, you know, where it's like where like no, you must always plan in this way, and I think that it's completely perfectly fine to just keep putting your villains in front. Like the reality is that the like players aren't gonna really know the difference between we got here just in time to stop the villain and bad things would have happened if we hadn't, and the DM planned specifically for us to show up in the exact nick of time and there was never a risk of us not getting here in time. I don't think that there is like players typically I think aren't going to notice the difference, and if they do they don't care because it was cool and it felt awesome and it felt like the narrative thing that needed to happen, you know? Like
Mhm.
narratively it felt like the thing that needed to happen because that's the way that all
Yeah.
media plays out, you know?
Yeah, like it's one of those things where like if you arrive and catch them unawares every single time, if things go exactly the way
Right.
that the heroes would want them to go, it's not an interesting story and there's not interesting emergent like gameplay. If you there has to be some level of stakes to an encounter, right? Which is why
Right.
so often like well, why can't we just do this or that? Because it's imminent, right? They're doing the ritual now. They're setting
Mhm.
the town on fire now. The giants are coming down out of the mountains now, right? So
Yeah.
it's
So can we
there's
take a long rest
Yep.
now? Right now?
sorry.
Right here?
You just need to get a crisp 8 hours while your town is being ransacked, and then
Aw.
Yeah. So like it is good to like have the mm,
Rune
I
and
don't-
Relic has happened on one of my pet peeves about boss fights. I hate sacks of HP.
yeah.
Um, I really, really, truly despise boss fights where there is one enemy and they have like in Dungeons and Dragons in particular, like where
Mhm.
there is one enemy and they have an effective health pool of like 800. Like it's just a slog. I'm like,
Mhm.
or especially like if they have an effective health pool of like 5 or 600 and like an AC of 20 to 25
Yeah.
and they have super high saves, and so I'm like effectively now their HP pool is even higher. Like we're talking approaching 4 digits, and I'm like that's too much. That's too much. Your combat needs other things in it besides this guy.
Yeah.
Uh, if there's half a dozen people here who can make meteors rain from the sky and who can stab a dragon to death with a butcher's knife, like that person's gonna die. I don't
Yeah.
care how powerful they are, unless they are a literal god that can just snap their fingers and
Mhm.
turn them to dust.
Right.
Like that.
Well, and that's
There's
the thing, right? Like there's I think that there's more and more I'm becoming I used to do single monsters as my combats all the time. That and that's the way I designed them. It wasn't even like an intentional thing that I did. It was just like by default that's the way I designed my combats. More and more I'm in I tend and I think maybe it's a product of having been running a high level D&D campaign for a long time. um, is that more and more my encounter design is like, no, we're gonna have like a nice mix of things going on because it in at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how boring sack of hit points the boss is. If you have a variety of enemies on the board who are all doing different things, then you don't feel the monotony of the sack of hit points as much because you've got a lot of different things going on to
Mhm.
deal with. Now, that doesn't mean you should do this is not me telling you, "Hey, here's how you do the boring sack of hit points." That's not me saying that at all. I'm just saying like there are some creatures that are sort of designed that way, and if you're not heavy into like homebrewing or like altering or stat blocks and stuff like that, then a way that you can kind of take the boring edge off of that is by just having a lot more going on,
Mhm.
Mhm.
either mechanically or just with like more monsters on the board.
Yeah, I think the most boring part of any combat for me, either as the GM or as a player, is when I know that that boss is gonna die, but it still has 150 health points, or
Yeah,
200 health points, and it's got resistances to whatever the fuck.
yeah,
Like the fun part, both as the GM and as the player, is solving the puzzle of the combat. How do I
yes,
apply my resources to
yes,
this situation? And if my
Mhm.
resources are hit it till it dies because there's only one guy, like just hit it as hard as I can over and over and over and over
mm-hmm.
again, like that's
Mhm.
uninteresting to me. But if there's like ways that I can make the boss vulnerable, or if there are other minions who also pose a threat, or if there are environmental hazards that I need to
Right.
deal with. Like there
Yeah.
just other stuff in the game to change the way that I use my resources is really truly. And I don't care then if your boss has 400 hit points if I have to, look if I feel like I'm doing other things while I'm doing it. I'll care less
Yeah.
perhaps, but
Give the sorry, Renee says give the environment and initiative order if it makes sense. Kind of like, and then Jade says kind of like how I kept it creating an environment that was a factor in boss fights on Starbuck Fantasy. Yeah, so like that's the thing. Like, and here's what I have to say about that. Um, Layer actions I think were a good thing in that they made people, it forced GMs to think about the environment as a factor in and of themselves. As a solution to that, I do not think that layer actions are enough. I think that's not, like, layer actions are fine and good and have them if you want to have them. I think they can be cool. I think more importantly, you need to have the environment be a factor. Like if like the battle maybe when I used to design encounters, a lot of the way that I would design like set piece encounters is I would make uh one of the earliest and like sort of climactic battles that we did in our previous campaign. I don't know if you remember, Freeman, was in like in a cavern that was sort of deep underwater. And the cavern itself was sort of like a pocket of air, but there was a pool kind of in the center of this cavern, and all of the combat took place on like the ledge that ran around the outside and sort of the platform that jutted out into the center where there was like a ritual taking place. And that meant that there was a limited number of places where people could walk, and distances now getting to the enemies was part of the combat, how to physically get to them. And like then I did that just sort of as because I had a scene in my head. But after that I was like, wow, that was really successful and really cool. Now then I started designing all of my encounters with some environmental factor, and notice how that wasn't a layer action that triggers at a specific time in the initiative order. It's just a factor of the environment. It's just there. And that's a huge part of it. A huge part of that kind of design. um, I won't go into too much detail about this, but like another example from that campaign, the Cthulhu fight, where this gigantic eldritch monstrosity was wading through an ocean, and they had to figure out how they were going to get to him to fight him. And most of that combat was the party using their various options of staying in the air, of like flying. There was like a flying carpet. There was a nightmare involved. There was a griffin. There was like the fly spell. Like all of them using all these different options to be like in the air and fighting this thing because it was in a place they physically could not reach.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, Matt also asked me to share this example, and this was the
Mm-hmm.
game that Lucas played in, which is Geek Out said you shared a great example a while ago. You share as a GM how you told the players there's another way to deal more damage. It's a pretty cool example what you're talking about. Yeah, so this was the Destiny 2 meets Dungeons and Dragons game
Mm-hmm.
that I was running, and basically when the characters arrived in the boss room, I drew it out on the map. I kind of placed them about where they had arrived in it, and I kind of just like swooshed them up there because the game had already been going for a couple hours, and I knew the fight was going to take a couple hours, and I didn't want to play D&D for 8 straight hours.
The curse of one shots.
Yeah, I know.
It either becomes a two shot or it goes for 8 hours.
I was like, this dungeon is a great 2 to 3 session adventure. But yeah, so I basically just teleported them from like the second encounter to the boss. But I placed them on there, and I was like, okay, big bad evil boss guy right here in the middle, huge towering like ogre monstrosity shooting like eye laser beams, and I described plenty of other things in there. But right off the bat, like, of course, because it's what you're going to do, big boss guy, a bunch of minions spawn, and everyone's like, well, if we kill the boss, that's the most dangerous thing in the room, right? And so they attacked him, and I immediately, I was like, okay, your attack doesn't do as much damage as you thought it was going to do. And then above table, I was just like, that guy has resistance looking at this room, and based on everything that your characters have gone through in the last 2 hours of their lives and our lives, there is something in this room that will make him more vulnerable. And immediately everybody switches gears from the boss to examining the terrain, the placement and type of enemies, and it kind of moved from there. And as a GM, essentially what I did is I was like, okay, so yes, this guy does have 300 hit points and resistance to all damages, but I expect this combat to be about 6 or 7 rounds, and in those 6 or 7 rounds, by the end of that, I expect that players will have their super ability that I gave them. And if one or two of them use those to clear out enemies, then one or two of them will have it up, and they will be able to just delete that boss if they do the mechanic that I have built here. And sure enough, right out the gate, I told them that guy is going to be very hard for you to kill conventionally. There's a way in this room to make him vulnerable. Your characters would know this. And then they set to it. They spent 5 or 6 rounds killing a bunch of enemies, ferrying like various little motes of light and lighting flames that like melted the enemy's armor. And then in one massive round, just absolutely blew the guy away with like 300 damage in a round.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Because, functionally, I took him from having 300 health to about 80. Because I made him vulnerable to damage, which is 4x multiplier.
You know what's an interesting thing? Sorry, that just made me think of an interesting mechanic that I came across in Baldur's Gate 3, right? Which I'm tempted to use to in an encounter design at some point, which is
the golem.
The golem? No, not the golem. But it's the she's a Thorm in Act 2. She's the gold the toll, right? If you get into combat with her, and there's all these like skulls that are floating around that like do bad stuff. Like you do not want to like leave them. But she has like just an absolute fuck ton of hit points. And if you're playing on one of the higher difficulty modes, it's real bad. Like, it's really, really bad. Because she also hits like a fucking truck. She has a mace that lets her do extra damage depending on how much gold she has. And she has a lot of gold. And so, one thing that I think is very cool, I got into that fight because I failed some persuasion checks. Don't at me. And I was like, okay, these skulls are fucking me up. I gotta take them down. And as I started taking them down, I noticed that it was doing something to her. And I looked, and I was like, didn't she have more HP before? And it turns out that each time you kill these things, each time you kill one of these skulls, it reduces her hit points to a certain by a certain amount. And one of the things that's very cool about that is that you basically get her from like having 500 and some odd hit points at the beginning down to like, yeah, it's like, I don't know, something ridiculous, like 10 hit points. Without even focusing on her, just by going after like the minions. And I think that's such a like cool concept. I think I did something similar to that in our Axiom game, didn't I, Freeman? With the Death Knight.
Sounds really familiar.
Where there were there were flame skulls that and they kept they had one hit point, but otherwise functioned exactly as flame skulls do. And he had 3 of them, and at the top of each round, they'd come back. Whatever flame skulls were gone, they'd come back. And as long as they were there, he was completely invulnerable to damage. And also the flame skulls could do flame skull shit, like dropping fireballs on everybody. I don't recommend doing that for anything other than high-level PCs.
You know how flame skulls do.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah, like that kind of thing, that kind of mechanic is very cool. Another good way of like doing the problem solving mechanic, right? Because one of the biggest issues that I have as a GM so often is this ingrained thing that we all seem to have from video games or whatever, that if you defeat the boss, then everything else in the room stops being a problem, so we focus on the boss, right?
Yep.
And that's a huge problem that I have, because I'm like, I've got all these other fucking minions in here, or these other like ads in here, and you're just completely ignoring them. The disrespect.
I mean, they're just over there like, what am I, chopped liver? Come on, get over here.
And it's it's one of those things where like, when you're making encounters, the kind of key, I think, is answering the same question that a game designer has to answer when they're making a game, which is what prevents the person playing this game from making the optimal choice in every single situation. Why do they not just make the best choice every time?
Yeah.
And the best choice in any boss situation is going to be hit the boss, because if the boss dies, that's the most dangerous enemy in the room.
Yeah.
Or it's the most important enemy in the room, narratively speaking, depending on what kind of game you're playing. So you, as the person who's figuring out how your characters are going to fight this guy, figure out a reason that they can't do that, right? Or that it's
Yeah.
harder for them to do that. And those like the minions that you put in there should probably interfere with it. It can be just damage, but like battlefield control, terrain, like warping terrain, giving advantages to the boss. Maybe the minions are protecting some like arcane foci that give a shield to the boss. As a person who's played a lot of Destiny 2, we do like video game and MMO bosses do love a big immune shield that you have to fulfill certain conditions to break to get a damage phase or
What I'm
whatever. Like,
realizing, John, is that we're describing essentially designing your boss encounters the same way that Sam Reich and the other Dropout people design an episode of Game Changer.
yes.
They have to figure it out as they go. Each turn gives them new information, and
Also, like, I think it's immensely helpful to think about how long do I want this to take? How
Mhm.
many rounds about do I expect this to take and plan from there? That's a helpful thing, I think, to think about when you're doing it. And also, Nico had pointed out something fantastic, which is that GMs should absolutely make note of objective markers from video games. I am a huge proponent of stepping above table for a minute and saying, because your characters are who they are and are in this moment in a way that you, the player, are not, they would notice these things.
Mhm.
Um, there's absolutely it breaks some level of like verisimilitude or whatever of the narrative, capital N narrative, but like it's just a fucking game, dude.
Yeah.
And I think it's more fun when your players know what puzzle they're trying to solve than when it's not.
Yeah. So, couple things now that we are at kind of the end of our time here. I feel like we have thoroughly discussed this topic, but there's always going to be more to talk about, so we'll probably revisit this at some point. Couple things. One, I did not want this to go completely unacknowledged that tomorrow is Star Wars Day. And we talked about Anakin exactly one time, and that I think is I was gonna bring it up earlier,
Oh,
and then
In passing,
I know in passing.
oh, the disrespect.
The disrespect. um, but
we
yeah,
underestimated his.
God damn, here it comes, here it comes. Get them all out now. Uh,
Let me put. What did you say, John?
I said we underestimated his power.
I'm gonna put sand on that wound.
oh, okay,
I
all
hate
right,
sand. It's coarse
all
and
right.
it's rough and it gets in.
Well,
Right.
begun this pun war has. Anyway, um,
Okay.
anyway, we're gonna go. Um, we're gonna respect it when he comes to Jedi Master. Jesus Christ, Nico.
There you go. Thank you, Nico.
Oh God.
Ooh. Okay, we're gonna
Brutal.
go.
Ouch.
It's I will. I will also take this opportunity to say that because like three of them are here tonight or were at least. Um, even though I am no longer in it, y'all should check out Star Trek Intelligence, which I assume is happening tomorrow. But shut up, Matt. You get that out of here. Get that shit out of here. I'm not gonna. I'm refuse to acknowledge this. Um, but you should check out Star Trek Intelligence because they're very cool people, and it's a very fun, very like kind of very yeah, it is streaming tomorrow. Cool, thanks. Very oddly cerebral. It gets oddly cerebral a lot of the time. Despite
Ooh.
a lot of us making head empty decisions a lot of the time. But you should check it out. It's at 3 p.m. Pacific time, 5 Central, and you should check it out. It's very cool. Over on Rune and Relic. I'll be throwing in Star Wars puns amidst the Star Trekking. Excellent. Excellent.
As you should.
As you should.
Just to really rile up the folks.
Just to really just rile up the folks, yeah. But yeah, so those were sort of my two items of business. Remember that on Monday, 5 p.m. Pacific time, episode 11, the penultimate episode of Tomorrow is Dead, season 2, will be airing on our very own YouTube channel. I almost said Twitch channel, but that's not true. YouTube. It'll be live at 5, and then after that you can watch it whenever you want.
Nothing bad happens to anyone.
Nope,
Oh my
not at
gosh,
all. Not at
shush.
all. Nothing happens.
Nothing
Um,
bad happens to
I'm
anyone.
having flashbacks right now.
and
I
then
was
of course,
there.
you can also pick up some of our merch in the merch store, like this nice
That's a
hoodie
good
that I have always
plug-in.
had and definitely didn't just arrive today.
Just happened to have it on. Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, y'all can go check those things out, and yeah. Also,
That's all
some
I got, too.
announcements real quick for about Patreon went out. Some changes coming in this month, to particularly the unfortunately very neglected World Builder tier. In the wake of us not having many actual plays, or any at all, uh, y'all have had not very much to do. So we have found a use for that tier now, and the news about it has gone out. Y'all can go check it out. It's I'm very excited about it. So yeah. Um, that's it. That's all I got. We're gonna go. We're gonna leave. We're already way over our time, so we're gonna go. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us this evening. Have a happy Star Wars Day tomorrow. We'll see you on Monday for Tomorrow is Dead, but if not, we'll see you the next episode. Come roll with us. Good night and good zone.